Hello, my name is Robert Higginbotham, and in this video I'll be following and expanding on Assess Tutorial 1. The objective of this tutorial is to create geometry inside 3ds Max, manipulate its position, rotation and scale, and save it using industry standard naming conventions. We're going to start off by adjusting the units. To do that, we're going to go into Customize, and we're going to go to Unit Setup, and then we're going to change out of generic units into metric, and we want to be using centimeters. And we also want to change the system unit setup, so we're going to change here from inches into centimeters and hit OK. And you'll notice down at the bottom where we've got the coordinates, that's now switched over to centimeters. We're also going to have a look at changing the layout for 3ds Max. So if we click on the arrow down on the bottom left here, I typically like the layout of 3 screens on the left side, 3 viewports and a main perspective viewport to work in. This gives me a perspective, a top view, a front view and a left view. I just like to have that set up when I'm working on a model. We can, in whichever viewport we're working in, hit Alt W to go full screen, and we can change, we can hit that again to toggle out. We can also change that using this little button down in the corner here, but I tend to use keyboard shortcuts. We've got the Scene Explorer on the left here, which I like to give a little bit more space to, and then reduce the size of these smaller viewports on the side. And then the toolbars on the right I like to drag out just to give myself 2 columns, which is plenty of space for all the tools when you're actually working with modifiers. If you don't have the Scene Explorer, you can open up Tools, and it's just the one at the top here, and that gives you a new window with the Scene Explorer, and you can just dock that into the UI wherever you'd like to have that. But I have the Scene Explorer, so we're not going to need that right now. So the next thing we're going to do is adjust the grid panel that we've got that we built the model onto. For this, we're going to go up to the Snaps tool, Snaps toggle, and right click that, and we're going to go to Home Grid, and we're going to set the grid spacing to 1 centimeter, and we're going to up the extent, something like that, just to give us a bigger area to work on. And we'll just zoom in down here. So we're going to go to the Create panel, and we're going to create a box. To do this, we're going to click and hold and drag out the shape of the box. Then we're going to let go and pull it up and click again, and that's given us a cube. And you can see we've got the parameters to fine control the sizing of the box. So what we're going to do is set these to 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. If we were to switch to the Move tool and lose the parameters on the side here, we can go into the Modifiers menu and we can get those details back again here. And we're going to give it a length segment of 2, same with the width, and same with the height. Now we can't currently see that because the edge is through the centre of the model, but we can use F4 to turn on edged faces, and we can also use F3 to go into wireframe if we need to. But we'll move back over into edged faces. We can also use this menu here where it says wireframe currently. We can change this to default shading and turn on edged faces. Now to move around the scene, we're using the middle mouse button and dragging to pan. We can rotate by holding Alt and using the middle mouse button to rotate around the object like that. We can zoom with the mouse wheel, but we can also use Alt, Control and the middle mouse button to get a finer zoom for if you're working on something quite detailed. You can get right in there to mess with that. So now that we're at this stage, we want to name the primitive. We're going to click on its name in the Scene Explorer up here, and we're going to change its name currently to Crate, because that is what the tutorial guides me to do. But we will revisit naming shortly. And we also want to come over on the right here and give it the same name, so that everything matches up. Something else I like to do is change the colour of the primitive to a grey, and it just makes all of the shadows that little bit bolder, and it's much easier to see what's going on. Now if you ever lose where you're at in terms of rotation, you'll notice that there's a little gizmo up in the top here, and this shows northeast southwest, so you can always tell what the current orientation of the model is. Now to manipulate the object inside 3ds Max, we've got a couple of tools. We have the move, select and move, and that can be selected with W on the keyboard, and that allows us to move the object around. We can use the gizmo to move only on the x-axis, only on the y-axis and only on the z-axis, and we can also use the coordinates down at the bottom. So we can set this to, let's say, 20, and the box will move 20 centimeters on the x-axis. But what we want to do is we want to have the model zeroed, so we want the coordinates to all read 0. So to do that quickly, we can right click on the little arrows to the side, and that will position the box perfectly at 0 in the scene. We can also use the snaps tool, and the snaps tool basically, along the movement, it will always snap to the grid that we set up earlier. So it will be moving currently in 1 centimeter increments. We'll just zero that back out again. You can change the setting to the snap tool by right clicking on it, so we can align to grid points, we can align to a certain vertex, but we'll get into that a little later. So to rotate the object, we can use E on the keyboard, but we also have the button up here, select and rotate, and we can use that to rotate the model in any direction really. We can also use Ctrl Z to undo. That's really helpful in 3ds Max. And we can also use the snaps toggle, so we can be rotating currently in 5-degree increments. If we right click on the snaps toggle, the angle snaps toggle, we can also change how large that increment is, so it could go from 5 to 10 degrees, and we'd now be rotating 10 degrees at a time. And I'm just going to set that back to 5 degrees just by preference. So next we have uniform scale, which is R on the keyboard, and that can also be selected up here, select and uniform scale. Select and uniform scale only affects the visual scale of the object. You notice if I reduce its size like this, the parameters remain the same. we can use the utilities menu and go into measure, and this will actually show us the true dimensions, or the visual dimensions of the object. And I'm just going to undo that again with Ctrl Z, and we can use the snaps toggle again for scaling. So we've got a percentage snap toggle here. When we turn that on, you'll notice down in the coordinates, when we start scaling, we're actually scaling by a percentage, so we can take this to 20% of its original scale. And again, we're going to just undo that with Ctrl Z. And finally, by using Q on your keyboard, we remove control of transforms, but we're still able to select objects in the scene. This is really handy because it prevents you from accidentally moving something while you're working on a model, or rotating something, which is very easy to do, and even if it's just a small amount, that can make a model harder to work with and less visually appealing. Now, the position of the gizmo on the model is called the pivot point, and we can affect that by going into the hierarchy panel and select Affect Pivot Only, and we can move the pivot away wherever we like. I'll just turn these toggles off again. We can move the pivot around, and if we turn this off, when we move this, we're moving the box, the object, in relation to the pivot. Now, ideally, its original position at the centre of the bottom centre of the cube is the best position that you want for most models. An easy way of fixing this is we can centre the pivot point to the object, and then we can use the snaps toggle, and if we right click that and set it to vertex, we can now move the gizmo, the pivot point, and it'll snap to the vertex that we set up in the when we created this object. And we'll just select Affect Pivot Only, and we're moving the box again in relation to its central point. And we'll just zero that back out again so that the box is in the centre of the scene. Now we want to look at editing the object. There's a couple of ways we can do this. We can go into the modifiers panel, and in the modifier list we can search for Edit Poly, and we can apply that and we can edit the polys of the model. But the way that the tutorial guides me to do this is to right click on the model, and we can actually convert this cube to be a editable poly, and when we do that we get all of the options available to us to begin editing this object. We can manipulate the vertices, which are the little points that are currently showing blue at all of the corner points. We can manipulate the edges, which are the lines that we can see on the model. We can manipulate the polys, and we can also control click to select multiple of any of these, and we can affect the element. An element is any part of a model that's welded together, and there can be multiple elements within an object, and all of those elements would share the same name as the root. The one that I've left out for a moment was border, and I'm going to show how that works now. So if we take the poly editor and we delete one of these polys away, you can see we now have a hole in the model. Using border, we can select that edge, and it selects the entire loop around the hole. and this is really handy because we can use a little tool here called cap, and that fills the poly back in for us. So following the guidance on the tutorial, I'm going to move over to the west side of the model. I'm going to select polygons, and we're going to select these two polygons here, and we're going to use the angle snaps toggle, and we're going to rotate them by 55 degrees. And another way we can do this would be if I Control Z that, we can also use the rotation, the coordinates to handle rotation. So we could do 55 degrees here, and we'd rotate by 55 degrees on the Y axis, which we can always tell using the colours on the gizmo. Now to save this file, it's quite easy. We're just going to go up to File, we're going to go to Save As, and we're going to call the file name Crate, and that will be a .max file. We'll save that. So here we have the crate.max file. It's also worth mentioning when you're saving files like that, if we were to go to Save As again, we can use the little plus down here, and this will add 01 at the end of the file name. And if I just open my files back up again, you can see that that creates a new iteration of the project file. This can be really good if you're making any changes on a model that you've been working on for a while. It gives you the opportunity to roll back to a previous version if something breaks. So expanding on this tutorial, we're going to hide the crate that we have created, and we're going to create a new piece of geometry. We're going to create a box again, and we're going to set the parameters to something a little larger this time. We're going to do 100 by 100 by 100, and that will give us a meter cube. Now, because we're working in a scale like this, we're going to right click on the snaps and move back over to the home grid, and we're going to set that grid spacing back to 10, and that just gives us a little bit more freedom when we're using these snaps toggles. And what we're going to do with this, we're going to name this crate again, but we're going to prefix that with SM, which stands for static mesh, because we know that we're going to be working in Unreal Engine. What we're going to do this time is we'll remove the length segments. We'll just have one segment for each of these sides. And we're going to add an edit poly modifier to the stack. Now this allows us to go back to the box, and let's say we wanted to change the scale. We could say the length we only want to be 50, and that is possible because we can move down the stack, whereas if we convert to a editable poly, we're not able to do that. So we're just going to revert that change because we do actually want 100 centimeter cube. And inside edit poly, what we're going to do is select all the faces, and we're going to inset them. We're going to inset by we want to make sure that we're working by group, and we're going to inset by 10 centimeters. It's not group, we want by polygon, I'm sorry, that's my mistake. And that gives us a nice little dip on all sides. And then we're going to use extrude, and we're going to extrude by local normals for, let's say, 5 centimeters, just to, oh sorry, no, minus 5 centimeters, just to give us that little inset. And I feel like that looks a little bit more like a sci-fi cube, a crate. It's workable. There's a lot of tools available to us in the modifiers list which would take forever to go through, but just for a couple of things to point out, we can use backface selections. Backface selection, if I just demonstrate, we can select like that and we don't actually get anything on the other side of the model. We can also select by angle, so we could select all polygons by angle of 45 degrees to be able to select just the top of the model, or yeah, on this particular model that's probably the best demonstration I can give, but they're very powerful tools once you begin to use them. So that concludes Assess Tutorial 1. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.